Hello students, I am Dr. Saliha Jamal, Faculty Department of Geography from Aligarh Muslim University, Aligarh. I am here with the course Climate Change, Vulnerability and Adaptation, and today's topic of discussion is the importance of resource sustainability in sustainable development. So let us start the class and welcome to the class students. As we have discussed a lot about the resources, types of resources and the impact of climate change on the resources, particularly the natural resources, let us talk about the resource sustainability. Resource sustainability is what? Actually, it is the ability to manage the resources in such a way that it guarantees and it ensures that these resources are available for the future generations without depleting them at present. Means we have to continue our resources for long that it may be also used by our future generation. This ensures the resource sustainability. Sustainability simply means continuing something for long. So here we are talking about the resources. So it means that continuing resources for long. If we are talking about continuing resources for long, it means that it is to be used by our future generation. Now, if we talk about the sustainable use of this natural resources, particularly I am talking about the natural resources because these are mostly impacted by the climate change, and all the human made resources also depend upon the natural resources. So, sustainable use of natural resources is simply a process by which human beings can benefit from the resources available to them in a way that does not degrade the environment, because we are talking about sustainable use. If we are going to use the resources in a rational way by practicing certain sustainable practices, like we have discussed sustainable practices for agriculture, for water management, etc., then it will not degrade our environment. It helps to protect the environment and it also reduces the pollution and it also minimizes the waste. Actually, we become confused or many time by the term sustainable use and conservation. Actually, these two terms are very much different. When we talk about conservation, actually it attempts to maintain what we are having now, what we are having today, that is to be preserved and protected. Conservation means simply what we are having now, that is to be preserved and that is to be protected. But when we talk about sustainable use, it is some broader term which encompasses production also, which encompasses conservation or also, and the main thing, the sustainable use encourages the growth, that may be development of some alternative resources. For example, if we talk about the in energy sector, that is shift from the fossil fuels to some different forms of renewable and more greener, cleaner and environment friendly energy sources, just like solar, water, that is what we call is a hydropower, hydrothermal energy, solar energy, wind energy. So means sustainable use encompasses protection, conservation and it encourages growth. Encourages growth means it also leads towards a way for the alternative sources. That's why we say sustainable use differs from the conservation. Further, if we see that reckless and inefficient use of resources, that leads to certain consequences. It results in environmental pollution. It actually induces severe damages to the environment, and many times it exceeds the carrying capacity of the environment, and we are seeing its repercussions in various ways in terms of global rise in temperature, in terms of the erratic weather patterns, disturbed pattern of the rainfall, extreme weather event, etc. As here we are talking about the resource sustainability role in sustainable development, actually the goal sustainable development is try to maintain the balance between the environmental preservation, overall social inclusion, and we can say economic progress. Whenever we talked about the development, if it has a certain concept, and we have seen this concept of development that changed from time to time. It started with just having the concept of economic development. Development started the concept with the concept of economic development. So, to have the economic development, all the regions, all the nations in the race of economic development, they have used all the resources inefficiently, recklessly, without thinking the repercussions of this reckless utilization and over exploitation of the resources. So, later it was felt just not having the economic development, any region or nation can progress or can be said as developed region or developed nation. So, there is also need to develop a particular nation socially, culturally, as well as economically, as well as ecologically, by seeing the repercussion of this reckless use of resources. So, the second concept of development came in inclusion, means development can development will include economic development, social, cultural development, ecological development, means all this in inclusion. Third thing, when we started to see the repercussions in terms of the climate change, in terms of the extreme weather events, sea level rise, etc., then we started to think about sustainability, because many of the resources are having the limited stock and their rate of consumption is very much high if we compare its rate of replenishment. So, now we are thinking the development with respect to the sustainability. So, there is change in the concept of development from the time to time, and now we are talking about the sustainable development. Actually, that's why this sustainable development strike to balance between the environmental preservation, social inclusion, what I talked about, and even continuing with the economic progress. And this is one of the very important and essential goal which will have a great impact on the sustainability of the overall this planet Earth. So, what are the different strategies, or we can say different steps towards the, we can say, sustainability, or even we can say the role of sustainable development goals for the resource sustainability? We can see through these initiatives and strategies. First one, by ensuring long-term availability of the resources. As we know, population is increasing, the demand for the different resources are increasing, the demand for food, energy, water, that is consistently on rise along with the increasing world population. But many of the resources we know they are limited, they are having the limited stock, and they are being depleted by unsustainable consumption practices, which results in the shortage that can even also cause environmental damage, many times economic instability and violence. For example, as we know, mainly the natural resources are limited in stock, like some, we can say availability of fossil fuels, or this one is having one of the limited stock on which our economy is also very much dependent. So, their shortage can induce economic instability. That's why sustainable practices becomes very much important, and these sustainable practices can be practiced in different sectors, like in agriculture sector, in water conservation, in use of the renewable energy sources. All this will together contribute to preserve the resource availability while satisfying the present demand and without endangering its availability for the future generations. Second initiative or strategy you can see here, protecting the environment and reducing the pollution. We generally talk about 3 R's, 4 R's. Here I am talking about 4 R's. One is refuse. Just take an example. refuse. We are not going to use the products which are not environment friendly or which are toxic to the environment. Talking about the plastic, we may refuse the use of disposable products that we are going to use only one time, and we are going to dispose it, which is very much toxic for the environment. So plastic is a great example here. So we can refuse it. Here 1 hour. Second, even we can reduce it. How we can reduce the use of resources? Here with the reference to the plastic, it is given. If you read, student, I will reduce my plastic waste by making greener purchasing decisions and consider the life cycle of plastic which I bring into my life. Everyone knows how toxic this plastic is for the environment. So we can reduce it by saying no to it, by making more greener choices, maybe of paper bag or cloth bag, etc. Recycle. Recycle is one of the process where we are going to dispose of things is generally recycled for the repurpose, for using it again. If we see in terms of certain things, let us as we have taken the example of plastic, you can see I will recycle and dispose the plastic responsibility. Use recycle bins and encourage those I know to do so too. This is also one of the R. And lastly, reuse. We can reuse certain resources, certain materials like we can say plastic, rubber, metals, and we can use it. So these 4 R's, if we apply in our day-to-day life, it can help a lot in protecting our environment and overall in reducing the pollution. So reducing the environmental deterioration depends upon the prudent resource usages, how we are using the resources. On this practice, actually the environmental deterioration depends. Generally, if the practices are unsustainable like deforestation, overfishing, overexploitation of certain resources, excess reliance on the fossil fuels, these are some of the unsustainable practices which harms our environment and even it increases the pollution. So these activities like deforestation, overfishing, certain types of pollution, erosion, biodiversity loss, this has to be stopped, and we have to encourage the recycling, reuse, reduce, refuse practices, reducing the waste, cutting off the waste and promoting the cleaner technology. These practices has to be encouraged in order to sustainably use our resources and reduce the pollution. Another very important here sector which I am going to discuss about is promoting the economic stability and growth. How the economic stability and growth can be made more sustainable, because we know always that all the sustainable resource use is one of the major key of maintaining the resilient economy. Many of the natural resources are limited in stock, they are depleting at a very faster rate if we compare it from its recharging rate, which will lead to certain economic shocks, shortage in raw materials, price rise of the products, and even it can also affect the productivity. Because all of these sectors, if we talk about the industrial sector, agriculture sector, energy sector, they are dependent upon the resources. So any sort of change in these resources will lead to the change in this sector, the productivity of in this sector. So by investing in some sustainable practices of the industries or agriculture, or by investing in green technologies, economies can reduce their vulnerability to the resource scarcity and they can improve the productivity. Actually, this resource sustainability, it mainly emphasizes what I am talking about, reuse and recycling, because it contributes to the economic resilience by maximizing the value of the materials over time. Means if we are sowing is we are just think about certain material, certain resources, 5 kg of resources, it is used, it is consumed, but that 5 kg after consumption that can be recycled and reused, means the initial consumption is 5 kg only, but we are recycling it and reusing it, and the consumption rate is almost equal, it will become equal, means what is the recharge rate, what is the consumption rate. So here we can have such practices in order to maintain our resources for the long. Even by supporting social well-being and equity, which is very much important, because here we have to guarantee everyone, each and every individual, especially the vulnerable sections of the society, the poor nations, poor people, which have very much low access to the necessities like clean water, food, energy, resource sustainability. So if we guarantee these things to this vulnerable section, it will promote social fairness, which becomes very much important to enhance the social well-being. One of the very important step here we can take by lowering the poverty, we can improve the quality of life of the people. We can improve the sustainable resource practices by contributing and addressing socio-economic inequities among the people, particularly in the developing nations, where the residents frequently, we know that, heavily rely on the natural resources for their livelihoods. Mainly they rely in agriculture sector. For their livelihood, they rely on the aquatic system, for example, fishing and other resources that is obtained from the water bodies. For their livelihood, they are more in danger and they are more vulnerable. So it becomes very much crucial to maintain the resources for the long, not only to preserve the present situation of crisis, but also in order to make a very good situation for our future generations. Here education can play a very important role. If the people are being educated and they are being made aware about the repercussions of the reckless use of the resources, over exploitation of the resources, and even they can be taught about the sustainable practices of resource uses, these can enhance the resource sustainability in different domains. Another important initiative strategy for having the resource sustainability for sustainable development is mitigating climate change and building resilience. This is one of the vital element we know for the climate action, which becomes very much essential for sustainable development and for maintaining the resource sustainability. For example, deforestation and combustion of fossil fuels. If we take, these are one of the, here we can say, example of unsustainable resource practices, means deforestation is taking place, mainly combustion or dependence on the fossil fuels. This is the unsustainable practices which is impacting our climate also because of greenhouse gas emission. So these unsustainable practices have to be reduced, and it can be solved through by adopting certain sustainable practices. For example, by lowering these greenhouse emissions, by protecting these carbon sinks, that is forest and the water bodies, and by encouraging some climate resilient practices. For example, afforestation, reforestation. These are some of the sustainable practices or shift from the non-renewable energy sources, particularly from the fossil fuels, to the renewable energy sources like solar, wind, hydropower, etc. These are some of the sustainable practices which is very much important to make the earth resilient to develop resilient for the earth towards the climatic changes. So, these are the few of the sustainable practices which can help in mitigating the climate change and building resilience. Not only this, the very important thing come here is encouraging innovation and technological advancement, because this is the particular important thing which paves the way where we can encourage the growth for the sustainable practices. This actually paves the waves towards the conservation, protection, and which encourage the growth of some alternative sources of the resources. For example, fossil fuels, alternative sources of resources may be obtained from the wind, or we can say tidal energy, hydrothermal energy, etc. Uh, Innovations in generally fueled by the resource sustainability, as we look forward for the novel approaches to boost the productivity, we have to cut waste, lessen their negative effects on the environment. Sustainable practices like sustainable farming practices, already I have explained, if you remember, like we can reduce the water use in irrigation sector by adopting sprinkler and drip irrigation. We can also have drought resistant crops in drier regions. We can practice diversification, crop rotation. These are some of the sustainable farming practices. Sustainable practices in renewable energy sources, green technology investment. These all will result in innovation that will certainly boost the economy as well as the environment. For this, we have to reduce dependency on the non-renewable resources. Actually, what we have already discussed, the non-renewable resources are the resources which cannot be renewed quickly, or we can say it is limited in stock. If it is once depleted, it gets finished. So, we have to emphasize how this non-renewable resources are being utilized. These non-renewable resources, for example, minerals, fossil fuels, and many of the metals, they are limited in stock and they are not equally distributed everywhere. That's why all the regions are, we can say, they have to depend upon one another for either one of the other resource. So, if we practice sustainable resource usages, which will encourage certain practices like transitioning to more and plentiful and widely available renewable energy like solar and wind, this can enhance the resource availability at wider space if we compare to the availability of non-renewable resources. Not only this, by promoting energy independence, by lowering the reliance on the fossil fuels and non-renewable resources, stabilizing the international markets, economies thus becomes very much resilient. Talking about preserving the ecosystem, which is very much important, because ecosystem services are important because it offers a varied nature of services. For example, it supports soil formation, biodiversity, primary production, habitat. If you see, it has a supporting function. It has also a provisioning function, provide food and fiber, wood, cleaner water, medicinals. It regulates climate regulation, pollination of crops, store carbon, control flood, and overall it has a cultural function also, inspiration, recreation, education and aesthetic. Means so many services are provided through the ecosystem, and human well-being, economic well-being, social well-being, these all depend upon the ecosystem services in one way or the other way, as we are talking about. So, these services are generally deteriorated by the unsustainable resource use, which not only affects the biodiversity but overall the different ecosystem of this planet Earth, maybe in terms of water quality, air quality, agriculture, etc. That's why sustainable resource management becomes very much important in order to save overall ecosystem, provide people with supportive and more economically encouraging livelihoods, health and even the food security by preserving the essential ecosystem services. So, preserving ecosystem services becomes very much important. Talking about empowering local communities and indigenous knowledge. Why we are talking about, we know everything. If we talk about a certain region, it is generally experienced, whether we are talking about the resource use, the practices which a particular community use to manage or conserve the resources, these all things, these all generally the knowledge about these all things, the local and the indigenous people, they have more about their own region. So, integrating these indigenous and local knowledge, which is generally developed over the generations, if we talk about, it leads to the environmental stewardship. So, even now certain policies, they all encompass the experiences and the advices from the local people while devising policies of certain events, disaster, etc. So, because these communities, they have the important knowledge about the resource conservation and biodiversity protection strategies by using the resources of their own local region. That's why government and organization, they empower the local communities to preserve the cultural heritage, and they also advance environmentally sound practices by integrating this knowledge into sustainable development. As this method encourages inclusivity, because the people also generally feel empowered if their advice, their practices are given due importance. So, these advice driven solutions, they generally produce successful and culturally appropriate sustainability plans even for the governments. Not only this, it becomes very much important when we talk about the role of sustainability in sustainable development, how it supports health and reduces environmental hazards. We know that particularly in developing nation, the unsustainable practices can have detrimental effects on health by causing pollution, deforestation and inadequate waste management. For example, burning of fossil fuel. We know that it pollutes the air, it causes various direct and indirect respiratory elements, and even also industrial waste, we know it contaminates air and water, lower the quality of air and the drinking water. This all impacts health directly or indirectly. So, by practicing again some sustainable practices, by lowering pollution, encouraging access to the cleaner water and by guaranteeing healthier air, sustainable resource management lessens the health risk. The most important thing, whether we talk about so many strategies, initiatives or even the role of sustainability in sustainable development goal, the main things come here is aligning with the global sustainability goals. There are different global sustainability goals. We will talk in further in our few lectures about the sustainable development goals. So, we have to align our sustainable practices with the global sustainability goals in order to have better result, inclusive result. As we know, the sustainable development goals of the United Nations, they are very much aligned with the resource sustainability, especially with reference to the clean water, that is the SDG 6, reasonable and clean energy, SDG 7, responsible production and consumption, SDG 12, climate action, SDG 13, and life on land and underwater. We are going to talk about all these SDGs further in our lecture series. So, just these are the few major sustainable development goals which are directly aligned with the resource sustainability, thus encouraging the sustainable resource practices that will aid different nations in achieving these objectives and will support the international effort whether to address the social, economic or environmental issues all. So, there is a dire need to align all these practices with the sustainable development goals, and we have also seen that the sustainable development goals are very much inclined with the resource sustainability, particularly with the few of the sustainable development goals which I have talked about, like clean water, responsible production, consumption, climate action, etc. So, international collaboration is improved by aligning such responsibilities with sustainable development goals towards the common environmental goals. So, this alignment towards the common environmental goal will help a lot to faster achieve our sustainable development goals in near future. We can say finally, the encouraging a shift to sustainable consumption and production, that becomes very much important, because few things we can manage individually from our own side. We have to change our consumption pattern. We have to reduce our consumption pattern. We have to recycle, reuse certain things. Thus, we can encourage a responsible consumption behavior by cutting back the usages, by selecting the economically friendly products, and by recycling certain things and shifting towards the eco-friendly products, cutting the waste and even cutting the usages of certain resources. That will help a lot in resource sustainability. Additionally, if we talk about sustainable production, that fosters innovations, efficiency across the industries. If we talk about these efficiency will lead to long-term economically and environmentally viable products. So, we have to shift towards the sustainable consumption and the production pattern through the waste management, through the sustainable resource management, what we are talking about. So, by design of sustainability D4, we have also talked about 4R also, by cleaner production of resource and efficiency, by increasing the efficiency of the resources through innovations and technological advancement, having the sustainable transport, eco-labeling and certification for the cleaner use product, and sustainable procurement, sustainable market and sustainable lifestyle. So, these things becomes very much important on our part. And lastly, if we talk about fostering a cultural responsibility and awareness, actually we have to encourage resource sustainability that fostered awareness and responsibility for environment among the people, communities and industries, where the certain programs for public education awareness will place a strong emphasis on the value of the resource conservation. Since we know that tackling the environment and the social issues, we require a collaborative action, a group action for the sustainable development dependency. So, overall inclusion of the whole society and also with government and non-government organization, we can proceed for a wider awareness programs towards the sustainable developments which depend upon the sustainable resource, sustainable practices regarding the resource exploitation. So, In conclusion, here we can say that resource sustainability is very much important for achieving the resource development, and because this resource sustainability and resource development will ensure the balance between the economic growth, social equity and environmental protection. And by promoting the sustainable resource management, we can secure availability of essential resources for the future generation. I am saying again and again, if we are talking about the sustainable resource management, the focal theme is to ensure the availability of the resources for the future generation. So, we can also mitigate the climate change through the sustainable resource management, and even we can reduce environmental pollution. The sustainable practices will support in economic resilience, in building and certain we can say economic, social and cultural resilience towards the climate change. It reduces the dependency on the non-renewable resources. It also helps to preserve the vital ecosystem services, and also it contributes to the long-term ecological balance. So, overall, it can be said that embracing resource sustainability that fosters innovation and aligns with the global goals, and it cultivates a culture of responsibility, driving us towards a more sustainable future, which is the need of the hour. So, that's all for today's lecture, student. Have a nice day. Thank you.